Ina yan na 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 na. Hidi na 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 na. Yan na 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 na. An na 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 na. Hidi na 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 na. No na na. Shalom, shalom, wonderful friends. That melody is from Achenu Po Beit Yisrael, famous for calling home captives, kidnapped and the like. That's been sung for thousands of years. Whenever there's been people being prayed for who are kidnapped to be returned home. So I'm happy to see you all and to start session 3 here together on one of the very fascinating and controversial studies done by Philip Zimbardo called the Stanford Prison Experiment, and some of the conversations that will emerge from that. Interesting enough, or I guess not interesting enough, but worth noting is that he actually passed away 1 week ago. And so I'll put here in the chat. I mean, you can look up any article about it, but he was 91 when he passed away on October, I think 15th. It's like exactly a week ago. So, and I knew that because we reached out to him just a few months ago for a VBM interview conversation, and he said, I'm not well. So anyways, so we're going to do 2 poll questions today. We hope you can sustain your interest and energy to manage 2 poll questions. Here comes your first one. What's the most common reason for why people act cruelly? Option 1, because they're simply evil. Option 2, because they were victims treated cruelly. Option 3, because they're put into roles and situations that brings it out of them. Okay, it's a complicated question. And of course, it doesn't exhaust all possible answers. And you may want to choose multiple ones. And of course, there's many different contexts. But if you had to choose one for why you think the most common reason is for why people act cruelly, would you say it's because they're simply evil, because they were victims treated cruelly, or because they were put into roles and situations that brings it out of them? Okay, 14% say because they were simply evil. 57% say because they were victims treated cruelly. And 29% say because they're put into roles and situations that brings us out of them. Okay, very interesting. So let's go to our second poll question. Is obedience to authority, option 1, mostly a noble value? Option 2, mostly a scary and dangerous idea? Option 3, sometimes noble and sometimes dangerous? How do you think about obedience to authority? Okay, 25% say mostly a scary and dangerous idea. 75% say sometimes noble, sometimes dangerous. Nobody says mostly a noble value. Okay, here we go, friends. Let's rock this. Research into the roots of human behavior is challenging due to the complex interplay of factors such as genetics, cultural norms, and different styles of upbringing. These factors shape who we become over time. The human mind is a never-ending maze, and understanding individual behavior involves unraveling the intricate mix of personal experiences, situational pressures, and underlying psychosocial mechanisms. This conversation today delves into one of the most impactful yet controversial studies of the 20th century, the Stanford Prison Experiment. Endlessly fascinating and endlessly debated, the Stanford Prison Experiment remains a lightning rod in the field of psychology. While it could be hailed as a groundbreaking inquiry into the most basic elements of humanity, its ethical implications are just as troubling. Regardless of perspective, the Stanford Prison Experiment forces us to confront the uncomfortable and undeniable truth that human behavior can be dramatically shaped by external factors given certain parameters. Conducted in 1971 by psychologist Philip Zimbardo, the experiment and its results stand in stark contrast to broader, sometimes abstract theories like Freud's. Zimbardo's experiment focused on the concrete, examining how a specific situation can powerfully shape human actions. For this experiment, funded by the US military to determine the root causes of antisocial behavior, Zimbardo recruited 24 male students who were randomly assigned the roles of guard or prisoner. Originally planned to take place over 2 weeks, the experiment quickly descended into chaos, leading to its termination after just 6 days due to the extreme behaviors and distress exhibited by participants. As the experiment progressed, the quote-unquote guards adopted increasingly abusive behaviors, exercising their power through psychological torture and abuse, while the quote-unquote prisoners became passive and showed signs of acute emotional distress. A riot prompted by the prisoners was quashed brutally by the guards. The rapid escalation of aggression and submission highlighted how rapidly and profoundly individuals could conform to roles assigned to them. The study's hasty end was prompted by the alarming ethical implications, including the lack of informed consent and the failure to protect participants from tangible, long-lasting harm. One of the primary questions surrounding the Stanford Prison Experiment is whether the participants' behaviors were genuine or merely performative. Some skeptics suggest that the prisoners' display of distress, such as crying to be released, and the guards' heightened aggression were influenced by their awareness of the experimental nature of the situation, and possibly by the presence of Zimbardo himself, acting as de facto warden. This raises doubts about the extent to which the behaviors observed were authentic reactions to the simulated environment. Throughout the experiment, Zimbardo had aimed to illustrate how individuals could adopt roles that could then diverge significantly from core personalities under particular conditions. The experiment showed that even a kind and gentle person could, with the right amount of pressure and external stress, become belligerent and antagonistic when placed in a position of power within a structured environment. And of course, one of the most startling aspects of the Stanford Prison Experiment was the speed at which participants assumed their roles. The guards quickly embraced their authority, often exhibiting vicious and dehumanizing behavior towards the prisoners. The rapid transformation was surprising to many observers and highlighted the powerful impact of the social environment on individual actions. The experiment's findings suggest that situational dynamics can swiftly alter behavior, leading to actions that individuals might not typically engage in under normal circumstances. Indeed, the Stanford Prison Experiment's findings have had a lasting impact on psychology, particularly in understanding the power of situational influences over individual behavior, supporting the notion that situational factors can heavily influence behavior, overriding personal traits and moral inclinations. It has frequently been cited in discussions about the potential for cruelty within institutional settings, such as prisons and military environments. Despite its lasting controversial nature, the experiment underscored the need for ethical standards in psychological research and has inspired ongoing debates about the balance between scientific inquiry and participant welfare. Yet, we are left to ponder, did it reveal a darkness lurking within us all, or was it a theatrical performance influenced by the experiment itself? The ambiguity of its findings compel us to critically examine the interplay between situation and personality in shaping who we become. The Stanford Prison Experiment certainly brings to mind profound experiments similar to those posed in the aftermath of the Holocaust. Why do people act cruelly on a systemic level? What entices ordinary people to kill, to maim, to seek pleasure in the destruction of others? These questions delve into the darker parts of human nature, parts that brutally show themselves all too often. Exploring whether individuals inherently possess the capacity for brutality, or if they become mere cogs in a larger malevolent system, is an issue that not only interests developmental psychologists, but political philosophers as well. Famously, Hannah Arendt, a journalist covering the trial of Nazi leader Adolf Eichmann, highlights this debate, questioning whether his actions were driven by personal evil or if he was simply following orders within a genocidal regime. In the book, she writes that the trouble with Eichmann was precisely that so many were like him, and that the many were neither devils nor fanatics, but ordinary people who had never learned to think. Of course, this is a very controversial view of Arendt, where many want to view Eichmann and the like as purely evil people, and she doesn't want to say they're not evil, but she wants to say that there's tyrannical systems that we primarily want to combat, the system. And it's a mistake to look at the bad apple or the cog in the wheel as opposed to looking at systemic reform. The experiment further raises the issue of whether the problem lies with individual bad apples or the broader system itself. In the context of systemic racism or authoritative structures, the experiment suggests that when individuals are placed in positions of power, the group dynamics shift significantly towards the path of quickest and unrestrained cruelty, potentially leading to behavior that they would not exhibit under normal circumstances. This notion challenges us to consider whether it's the systemic conditions or the authority itself that fosters such behavior. Philosophers like Emmanuel Levinas and Jean-Paul Sartre offer insights into the dehumanizing effects of role assumption. Levinas emphasizes the moral significance of seeing another's face, suggesting that the inability to see the humanity in others can lead to atrocious acts. As he writes, the dimension of the divine opens forth from the human face. During the Stanford prison experiment, guards wore reflective sunglasses to dehumanize themselves and thus created a psychological barrier between themselves and the prisoners. These sunglasses made eye contact impossible, reducing the guards' sense of accountability and enabling them to act in an even more aggressive manner. The sunglasses reinforced the guards' symbolic authority and contributed to their authoritarian appearance. This element of the uniform helped the guards fully immerse in their roles, leading to the rapid escalation of abusive behaviors. Sartre discusses the concept of bad faith, where individuals lose their freedom by becoming overly committed to their roles. He famously illustrated the concept of bad faith through the archetype of a cafe waiter. The waiter, in an attempt to fully embody their role, adopts an exaggerated and feigned demeanor. Their movements become overly precise, their speech overly formal, and their overall behavior suggests a complete immersion in the character of a waiter. Sartre argued that this performative persona of the waiter morphs into a denial of the waiter's authentic self in a misguided effort to reduce oneself to a mere object or function within the world. By constructing a rigid identity as a waiter, the individual disowns their inherent freedom and authenticity in favor of a false, predetermined role. Now, I happen to find Sartre fascinating, even though I don't understand so much of what he says. In addition to his girlfriend and well-known, renowned philosopher Simone de Beauvoir, But one of the things I find obnoxious about Sartre is that he's doing his philosophy work in cafes and it's chain smoking in the back and almost like mocking these waiters, as the philosopher in the back, looking down upon people observing their role in the working class, while he can, as a philosopher, kind of transcend these roles in his attainment of freedom. There's certainly some charitable reads of what he's doing there, but it's something that I've often found a bit annoying, that people are trying to keep their jobs, and sometimes playing a role may help them keep that job. We also see this role taking in the harmful act of hazing. Hazing is a troubling phenomenon that emerges in various group settings, particularly in fraternities or sororities, sports teams, and in military units. It involves rituals, tasks, or challenges imposed on newcomers as a condition for acceptance into the broader group. Practices can range from harmless pranks to severe and harmful acts, often justified as traditions or rites of passage. Indeed, we hear stories in the media about fraternity pledges dying from alcohol poisoning or drowning or any other litany of horrible things because they are desperate to be accepted into the group. The culture of hazing thrives on the need for group cohesion and conformity, exploiting the power dynamics between established members and initiates. Bullying culture is similar to hazing, but is often more permeating in our culture, occurring in any environment, including schools, workplaces, and online. It involves repeated behavior intended to harm or intimidate individuals perceived as vulnerable. This aggressive culture is sustained by power imbalances, social hierarchies, and a lack of effective intervention from authorities, who either cannot step in or turn a blind eye to it. To address the problem of bullying requires a comprehensive approach that includes education, policy enforcement, and support systems for victims. In contemporary prisons, gangs frequently form along racial lines, creating factions that inmates cannot easily escape once they join. These gangs provide protection and a sense of belonging in the harsh prison environment, but also perpetuate violence and criminal activities in the name of cohesion. The emergence of such gangs is often a response to the need for security and identity in a setting where official systems fail or do not care to provide adequate support. There's someone here on our staff who is both Black and Native American, and in his past incarceration, we were discussing, how that works for, tribal identities in prison, and kind of some of the complexities that go along with being biracial or having multiple identities, and some of the complexities there. He certainly affirmed, what everyone knows around, these racial groups that these groups that form along racial lines, but also kind of complicated, what happens as people are more and more mixed identities and mixed racial. So anyways, let's go back to Zimbardo. Zimbardo's exploration of the human psyche under extreme conditions yielded significant insights into the interplay between the individual and the environment. His latter-day research significantly contributed to the understanding of de-individuation, a psychological state characterized by a diminished sense of self and the reduction of personal responsibility. This phenomenon occurs when individuals feel anonymous or less identifiable, leading to a loosening of moral constraints and an increased likelihood of engaging in deviant or aggressive behaviors. A classic example of de-individuation can be observed in the behavior of online trolls. Fueled by the luxurious anonymity that the internet provides, trolls display hostile, hateful, and offensive conduct that they would possibly or probably refrain from in face-to-face interactions. Maybe you've witnessed this in your life. The absence of social cues and accountability fosters a sense of disinhibition allowing for impulsive and harmful behaviors to emerge. Furthermore, Zimbardo's concept of social intensity syndrome, SIS, which he posited in 2008, offers a unique lens through which to examine the psychological and behavioral adaptations of individuals within high-stress cohesive groups, such as military units. He focused on the intense socialization and shared identity forged in these settings, shedding light on the factors that contribute to the development of strong group bonds and the potential for both extraordinary courage and unexpected cruelty. The military funding and context provided for his prison experiment provided fertile ground for Zimbardo to delve deeper into the complexities of power hierarchies. His subsequent investigation of the Abu Ghraib prison abuses, brought to light in 2003, marked a pivotal moment in his career. In his book, The Lucifer Effect, Zimbardo challenged conventional wisdom by arguing that the atrocities committed there were not the work of a few deviant individuals, but rather the outcome of a systemic failure. By examining the situational pressures and environmental factors that contributed to the abuse, Zimbardo further demonstrated through a concrete and horrific example how ordinary people can be formed into perpetrators of evil when placed in specific circumstances. The Torah's view on human behavior intersects with principles found in behavioral economics, which suggests that people's actions can be predictable based on certain stimuli and environments. For example, marketing strategies or political campaigns often rely on understanding these patterns to influence behavior. Think about why, when you're listening to a podcast or the radio or watching TV or whatever you're doing, why you see certain political ads framed certain ways they do. It's based on a ton of data as to what's going to move independence one way or another. The Torah underscores, however, that despite these influences, individuals have the freedom to transcend situational pressures and societal norms. This moral autonomy is a cornerstone of Torah ethics, advocating that people should not merely conform to legal or moral norms dictated by their environment, but should exercise their free will and make ethical choices. In this way, Jewish legal philosophy encourages resistance to passive assimilation and promotes active engagement in maintaining one's moral and spiritual integrity. The Genesis story of Shimon and Levi, the sons of Yaakov, and the rape of their sister Dinah, as recounted in the Torah, is a poignant example of group dynamics and the potential for collective violence. After Dinah is violated by Shechem, the son of Hamor, Shimon and Levi take matters into their own hands. They deceive the men of Shechem into circumcising themselves as a precondition for intermarriage with Jacob's family, only to slaughter them while they're incapacitated. This is Genesis 34, if you want to look at the chapter. This act of revenge is often interpreted as a response driven by rage and a desire for justice, albeit through violent means. It highlights how intense emotions and group loyalty can lead to extreme actions in the context of conflict. Right? One of the other things we learn is that nobody in the text talks to Dinah, comforts her, or asks what justice she wants. Right? Rather, the brothers act on her behalf what they think she would want. And we do want to think about victim-centered justice approaches. This is another topic for possible discussion. In Jewish thought, the concept of the Yetzer Hara, evil inclination, plays a crucial role in understanding human behavior. The Yetzer Hara is not an external force compelling individuals to commit wrongful acts, but rather an internal drive that each person must learn to control. This concept is introduced in the Torah and elaborated upon in various Jewish texts and traditions. The Yetzer Hara is contrasted with the Yetzer HaTov, the good inclination, which guides individuals towards righteous and ethical behavior. The Torah teaches that humans possess free will and the ability to choose between these good and bad inclinations. This perspective is reflected in the verse where God says, I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day. I have put before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life if you and your offspring would live. Uvacharta b'chayim. Not just value life, but choose life. This verse underscores the significance of personal responsibility and moral decision-making. While the Yetzer Hara might incline individuals towards certain behaviors, it is ultimately up to them to choose their actions, demonstrating the Torah's belief in human agency and the power to overcome negative impulses. Jewish philosophy also incorporates the concept of tikkun olam, which places heavy emphasis on the responsibility of individuals to improve and perfect the world through ethical behavior and social justice. This idea aligns with the notion of free will, as it calls on individuals to actively engage in actions that promote justice and kindness, regardless of external pressures or societal norms. By drawing on the concepts of tikkun olam, the Yetzer HaTov, and Jewish legal and ethical teachings, individuals and communities can address various challenges through informed, conscientious actions that promote justice and ethical behavior. Balance between recognizing situational influences and exercising personal responsibility is a key theme in Jewish thought. For example, the Talmud discusses the struggle between the Yetzer Hara and Yetzer HaTov, and emphasizes the importance of Torah study and following the mitzvot in strengthening the Yetzer HaTov. This holistic approach encourages individuals to develop their moral character and making moral choices, aligning with the broader discussion of human behavior and moral choice. It suggests that while external factors can influence behavior, individuals have the power and responsibility to rise above these influences and act righteously. Friends, to move towards a conclusion here, Zimbardo's research underscores the importance of studying the conditions that facilitate the erosion of moral boundaries. The Stanford Prison Experiment, an earlier study conducted by Zimbardo, provided a foundational framework for understanding how rapidly individuals can adopt roles and behaviors that are inconsistent with their personal values. When extrapolated to real-world settings, such as Abu Ghraib, these findings highlight the potency of situational power and the moral peril of unchecked authority. The implications of Zimbardo's work extend far beyond the military and correctional contexts. His research offers a compelling critique of simplistic explanations for complex and social problems. By emphasizing the role of systemic factors in shaping individual behavior, Zimbardo's experiment encourages a more nuanced understanding of human nature and the conditions that give rise to both heroism and villainy. His work serves as a powerful reminder of the fragility of human morality and the importance of creating environments that foster empathy, compassion, and ethical conduct. So, friends, I want to open up the conversation. I'm going to start by reading something here in the chat shared by Ken. The whole point of bad apples is that they spoil the rest. So if the others were not bad originally, they become bad by contact with the bad apple. Still a systemic issue. Okay, a very interesting point that there is a third position. There is the systemic injustice approach. There is the approach of what most people mean by bad apple, which is that it's not a systemic problem, but simply an unfair pointing out of some individual's bad behavior, not indicative of the system. And then there's this middle position, which Ken is pointing to, which is that the bad apples approach, which is about particular individuals, actually has the potential to shift the system based upon those individuals' behavior. So thank you, Ken, for sharing that. Okay, friends, I would love to hear thoughts and questions that folks have on anything discussed or beyond. Hi, Dr. Heydrich.
Hi. There are a couple of points that kept popping up in my mind as you were speaking. One is we are, I tend to feel, what I value or what I think is noble thought, noble action, godlike, if you will. The Christian national movement is completely different. Their values are totally different, yet they adhere to those and they base their actions on it. And just as we feel we are doing the right, godful thing, they believe exactly the same. So there's that difference of values that drives us. The second thing is I have always felt that humans, well, any life form, because we know we've watched even bees taking care of each other when they're wounded. But I feel that as we've been taught, humans are have the divine spark, whatever you want to say. We have the perfection, we have everything within us. It is how we evolve ourselves that lets us respond to things. It's not an innate evil, I don't think at all. And I want to quote one of the stories that you included in one of your in one of your books. And I've read so many of them. I can't tell you one title from the other. They're all fabulous. But the story of the Dalai Lama, when one of the lamas was released from 20 years in a Chinese prison where he was tortured and so forth for 20 years. And the Dalai Lama said, asked him, what was the most horrible experience that you had? What did you have to overcome? And the priest said, I lived in fear that I would hate the Chinese. That to me, it is an evolved person that can stay strong, not because of a sense of survival, but a love for fellow man, regardless of what that person does to the self. And that just puts a whole nother aspect to me on the idea of evil and good and what we are capable of and what we do. It's where we are individually evolved that we respond to outside circumstances. And I've just rambled. Thank you.
No, that was so wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah, to your first great point, it's around Christian nationalism and just how diverse the values are that are held in America. And how do we construct and hold a society together that both respects the diversity of those values while also puts up boundaries around how people try to force their own upon others. This is a really complicated, issue. And I think it's playing out right now in America in such a deep and profound way. So thank you for highlighting that. And your second point around the divine spark, and I just love your story you shared around the fear of coming to hate, so profound with the lamas, and the potential to transcend enormous social pressures for a higher calling, like you're saying. And I think that this is also true for any of us who have been deeply hurt by people. The ability to still love is almost miraculous. How can someone who has been hurt so much in intimate ways continue to find the ability to love and to give? And so, exactly what we're talking about today, this ability to transcend this social context, or if one comes to some conclusion that the majority of Americans are selfish or narcissistic or in it for themselves or whatever one concludes, it does not have to necessarily be true, that one can still say, like, I'm not going to assimilate into what I view to be the worst sides of American society. I believe, even if it's countercultural, that I can be more or better than what I view to be some toxic norms in society today. So, okay, so much more to say. But anyways, Janie, thank you so much for that. Yeah, really great start. Who else wants to hop in here?
Oh, hi. Thank you so much. I'm going to jump in with a little trepidation. So I live on Long Island in New York, and I'm Shomer Shabbos. I'll go with that, Shomer Mitzvahs. And my community is overwhelmingly now Republican. I mean, overwhelmingly. And I find it so hard to reconcile how ignore, in my opinion, the character flaws of the Republican candidate right now with the idea that it's the best thing for Israel. And I'm really struggling. My shul's become very political in a very right-wing way. And it seems like in a lot of ways, because the evangelical churches have aligned themselves with like settlers and things, that we're aligning ourselves with, I don't know about you guys. This seems to be that's why I'm here, a more hopefully balanced group. But on the one hand, we're so careful not to assimilate that seems like we're assimilating with wrong people. I don't know if that makes any sense. I'm trying to be careful.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. So I'm going to share. I'm going to share two stats here on the side, just so we understand what's happening in the Jewish community. This first one I'm sharing is from 4 years ago. An overwhelming percentage of Orthodox Jews in the United States plan to cast their ballots for Trump. 83% of Orthodox Jews said they would vote for Trump, compared to 13% who said they would vote for Biden at the time. That's 4 years ago. Now, there was a study done last month, and I'm going to share the results of that. Now, this was a more limited study. I think it only had a few thousand at most engaged, but it was done by an expert. And it says here, just from last month, modern Orthodox are currently 55% versus 45% for Harris. Haredi Jews, meaning ultra-Orthodox Jews, are 93% for Trump. And there's a continued shift. Now, I would suspect the ultra-Orthodox one I'm not surprised by, but I would suspect the modern Orthodox one is actually higher towards Trump. Although it says 55% support Harris, based on past studies I've seen, I would suspect it is higher. And we generally say more recently that over 70% of American Jews at large are going to back Harris. Over 20% of American Jews will back Trump. But then when you look at the denominational separation, it's significantly more liberal Jews, by liberal here I mean non-Orthodox, are Harris supporters. And as we see here, the vast majority of Orthodox Jewish supporters are voting Trump. And what's interesting about that, I know we're going a little far afield here, but I think this is kind of relevant because I think that some of the virtues in traditionalist religion are virtues of obedience to authority, as we see in Catholicism, in very different sense, as we see in Islam, very differently as we see in Orthodox Judaism. Liberal Judaism doesn't really embrace a big virtue on obedience to authority. One doesn't feel bound by their rabbi as a Reformed Jew or conservative Jew to do what they say. So, can I have an abortion or not? They might ask their, or political issues. They might ask their rabbi's thinking. But an Orthodox Jew typically often, especially the more traditional ones, feel bound by the authority of their rabbi to do this or that. And so this issue of authority, as Zimbardo looks at it, and in traditionalist religion, is very connected. And so it used to be that Orthodox Jews leaned a little bit more conservative politically because of two reasons. Because of their politics on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and Israeli security, and because of their interest in private school funding. Those were primarily the two issues that now social issues, Orthodoxy has become much more conservative in the last decade. What some people call the evangelical approach to or assimilation within the Orthodox America, where you didn't have Orthodox Jews going to NRA conferences or voting pro-life. You're supporting pro-life positions, or Orthodoxy embraces a halakhic view which could neither be categorized as pro-life or pro-choice. It would say it's complicated and it's case by case. You can't. It's not just a women's right to choose. It's not just that the life of a fetus, is equal to a mother. It's more complicated. But now you see more Orthodox Jews aligning with pro-life movement, and certainly there was no gun culture until recently that kind of emerged as well, and a number of other factors that have kind of influenced this Orthodox political slide to the right over the last 10 years. Now, the liberal political shift in the Jewish world is much more complicated and diverse, because there are Jews who go to, quote unquote, the far left, and there are Jews who more and more are doubling down as centrists, and that's a more complicated picture. But anyway, Susan, thank you for raising that. And I do think we are going to get more into this issue when we look at Jonathan Haidt coming up soon, and we look at some of how political identity and religious identity are interconnected with some of our psychological disposition. Okay, thank you. Okay, all right, Mara, over to you. Oh, I'm sorry, Mara or Mara? I'm blanking.
Yeah, Mara. Yeah, you're perfect.
Mara, good, thank you.
In English at least.
Yes.
So Jews have a lot more political power in New York, right? Super relevant. We are few in number here out in the Arizona, Phoenix greater area. But the Mormon group has a lot of political power here. And I just wanted to note that there is quite a significant movement within our Mormon neighbors towards, campaigns for Harris. I read an article from a professor from BYU recently and sent it to one of my friends and said, send this to your folks that are still, very much entrenched in that way of life. So it's just interesting when you think about the different ways to apply a moral code. It's not unilateral. And I mean, me working in public health, I work with liberal Mormons all the time, right? But that's not necessarily the majority. And given the way that they do hold so much political power, especially in Mesa, which is just a neighboring city to me, it's just interesting to see those reinterpretations that are very religiously based, right?
Yes, very interesting. And the Mormon community is often very misunderstood. I've had the chance to get to know some Mormon folks and tour one of their temples before it was consecrated. Interesting enough, with former Senator Flake and former Governor Jan Breuer. But that was an interesting tour. But the two most prominent Mormon former senators have both endorsed Harris. Both Senator Mitt Romney and Senator Jeff Flake, who both were considered, off the charts conservative in a different time period just a decade ago, but have a different view on kind of what's happening right now. And thank you for sharing, Mara, around what's happening there, around those trends. Another just side bit of information. If anyone here happens to be a fan of the band called Imagine Dragons, as my kids are, the lead singer in Imagine Dragons, who shares really nice values when he performs around mental health and youth and anti-suicide and a whole bunch of really powerful things around self-esteem. He is an ex-Mormon, and he talks in his concerts about, he doesn't mention Mormonism, but he talks about some of the positive influence of his youth, and how and some of that values formation. And so, as always, as a pluralistic body, I think it's fair for us to be critical of various religious and political approaches and also find the good in them as well. Just like we'd find the good in Orthodox Judaism and Reform Judaism, find the good in Mormonism, or in some other religious faith, even while we might have some critiques. So anyways, thank you for sharing that. That was very interesting. Who else wants to jump in here? Yes. Hi, Ken.
Here we are. Going back to where we started, it's the tension between societal pressure and individual choices is often a very hard one. I remember even back in college, before the beginning of time, I was taking a course called Deliberate Social Change in Cities, and we did a much quieter role play like that experiment of Zimbardo, in which we were each assigned to play a role as a person in the building of a city. And it's amazing how quickly one adopts the role that you've played. So if you've been hired to be a city planner, you're going to do things which are different than the person who's a developer. You're no matter what your individual morality, you fall into that role very quickly. And I know I was reading a book on the growth of Nazism in a particular town in Germany back in the late 1920s, and how hard it was for people who were not communists or socialists, in other words, were someplace on the conservative side of the spectrum, to resist joining the Nazi movement, because it was the only conservative movement that was going to be able to win. And so in order to have what they thought of as their values taken, they were willing to go along with what the Nazis do, which is, I think, what we have found in a lot of Republicans who wouldn't normally go along with all the things that Mr. Trump is doing, but because they view that as the only way to have their values be seen in society, they're willing to go along with the rest of the junk. It's very hard, I think, to resist that kind of social pressure. And certainly once the Nazis were in power, it didn't take very long for everybody to go along because they were scared. It happened very quickly. I know my parents left Germany in 1938, and it was they talked a lot about how no matter what the views of their friends were, who were their non-Jewish friends, they felt enormous pressure to go along with what the Nazis were doing, and fear if they didn't go along with what the Nazis were doing. And I think that's generally the case, that people feel enormous pressure. The moral strength to be a Navalny, and to be willing to sacrifice your life in order to not go along with the society is a very rare one. And it's I think it's hard to necessarily blame the individuals for self-preservation as their what they are willing to do to resist the way society is going. So it's an enormous. I mean, obviously, we want people to always make the moral choice and to not do things that are harmful to other people. But sometimes you do things that you think are helping yourself. I mean, we see that in the Gaza war. Clearly, there's horrible things happening in Gaza, but the Israeli soldiers who are fighting there clearly feel that that's necessary for their for the preservation of Israel and for their own self-preservation. And so even though they know that they're killing many people who are not necessarily Hamas supporters or Hamas members, they're willing to do that in order to preserve Israel. I mean, it's a terrible balance that people have to go through, I think, in difficult situations.
Thank you, Ken, for those insights. And I think that's a really important charitable view that lines up with our interest in the mind in the session, that people have a deep desire to be liked and a deep desire to fit in and a deep desire to have friends and to have community. And as you said, self-preservation. And I know many people who are like, I now find myself politically at odds with most of my family or with most of my friends, and they feel lonely, and that impacts how they think and how they talk. And I think it's right. It's not fair to say to someone, well, you need all new friends and you need to distance yourself from all your family and you need to leave your community. Right? Some people might do that, right? But there's many cases where people really feel very stuck socially and in familial settings. I've had to set up boundaries within my own broader family on what we can talk about and not, just to preserve relationships. I'm sure many people have done that. Just one other point on yours, and before we go to Matthew here, and I appreciate all that, is just, yeah, but on the other hand, while we want to be charitable to people and their human needs, like, how does fascism start, right? And how do fascist societies get out of control? And one of the things we know is that you try to break down trust in fundamental institutions. You break down a trust in the media. You break down trust in the judicial branch. You break down trust in elections. You break down trust in medical authorities. You break down trust in all the systems that make people feel safe and tell them they're only really safe with you, giving you an unparalleled authority to break norms and laws, because none of those other norms and laws can be trusted anymore. And we're witnessing that over and over. Even if some of the claims might have some legitimacy, around, bias in news or, or medical propaganda, I don't know, whatever, fill in the blank. And we should be really alarmed by how people we know and trust and sometimes even can be on that propaganda train that is eroding at the democratic foundation that protects us all, especially Jewish minorities like Jews. So thank you, Ken, for that. Okay, Matthew, over to you.
Okay. Comment that in a certain sense, because of the ability targeted advertising, we're all going through the same experiment that got halted after 1 week. And for example, we see some very, very striking TV ads in Arizona that Harris is a member of the squad. There's one I saw the other day about 3 elderly Jewish women talking about anti-Semitism and fear. We've got to get rid of Gallego and Harris, and only Trump can save us. But if you use Chat GPT, experiment I did, to ask, comparing those ads by the same group with the ads being run in Michigan, which has a heavy Muslim community, and you find they're running ads in certain areas how pro-Israel Harris is. So the Muslim community in Dearborn will vote for Trump. I have a close friend here. he and his wife change political parties every year just to screw up everything and get all the material. And we're living through what to me is a horrible experiment of compartmentalizing and pitting people against each other. And what do? I have a close friend here who's not Jewish, fairly liberal, has a friend she's been friendly with who's in her 80s. My friend is in her late 60s. Regularly takes the elderly woman out for breakfast once a month so they can talk. The elderly woman is far to the right on the spectrum. Had said to my friend, how can someone as intelligent as you not be out working for Trump? How can you believe anything you read? You have to look at the sources I get my news from. And this woman is very torn. She doesn't want to give up the friendship. This is an older woman who lives alone. But the targeting is so vicious that we're in the middle of that Stanford experiment. And I don't know how it comes out.
Yes.
And I have
yes.
not seen a single newspaper article, TV article comparing the ads run by the same groups in different markets. And by the way, you can do the same thing with the Harris ads. And I've reached out to someone to try and get a reporter to look at them. Because there's an RJC, which I assume stands for Republican Jewish Group, that's running an ads. And they're running ads, opposite ads, in Michigan. And it's real. I don't know what you do about that situation where they're tearing where people, and it's like Hindenburg made Hitler chancellor. Oh, we can control him. You can't control them once they're in office. I don't know what you do. We're in an experiment that I don't like.
Yes, yeah, we're in the experiment right now. That's a great place to pause on, and we do live in intense and fascinating, at least, if not troubling times. And I think these issues are very relevant to how people think about authority.
Can I interject one other comment?
Yes, please, yeah.
Do you know Tammy Caputi, the city council person from Scottsdale?
Yeah.
Jewish? Do you know that she's had heavy Mormon support in every election, including in this election? Mormon women come out because you have moral values.
Interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, very interesting. So, friends, maybe we can reflect as we leave today on our own sense of authority. Where do we place authority? And how is that serving us well and serving people around us well? And how might we rethink that? And so too with roles. Where do we play roles that are not necessarily might be inauthentic to who we are on a deeper level? And where might we reaffirm those roles? And where might we challenge some of those roles where we've become or act ways that are beyond who we want to be because of some of those social pressures? And how can we, as Ken said, perhaps be gentle with some people who get pulled along with that, but also how might we also challenge some of those norms to ensure that people can reclaim their freedom and free thinking? Friends, always a pleasure to be with you. I look forward to seeing you next week as we're just 1 week away from election. And we'll be continuing on election day too. I think election day is a Tuesday, right? Yes, it is. Election day is a Tuesday. I understand if some people can't be here, but probably most of you voted early anyway. So have a great day.